Hey everybody, how you doing? This is a big one. This is the complete works of making 10 bar stools from the very first cut. And what this first cut is, I have five 2x6s 12 feet long, and I forget the dimension, but I cut them into each piece into exactly five individual pieces. I think it was in the neighborhood of 30 inches long each, and that just happens to work out very well um, with my scale that I'm looking for. I have I've seen some bar stools in the area, and I've tweaked them to what I think are proper tweaks and adjustments. And I've taken a lot of notes, and I have a lot of dimensions and a lot of jigs. So this is the way I do it. Start off by cutting the 2x6, break them down into these roughly 30-inch segments. And then I set the table saw up, fine tune it so that I can make one cut that cuts the 2x6 directly in half. And I've got that figured out here. And now we could take all of those pieces and cut them all in half. So I had five 12 footers cut into five pieces each, so that was 25 shorter blocks of 2x6. And when I split all those, I'll end up with 50 pieces. And these are all going to be leg components for the bar stools. We're going to make 10 bar stools, 4 legs each, so we need 40 legs. Whatever's left over here, I'll just save and use them on the next batch of bar stools. And some of these also will be used for other components within this bar stool. But it never hurts to have a little too much. Also, sometimes you end up with a piece that's just a little bit ugly enough that you don't want to use. It might have a edge with too much bark on it, something like that. Um, I've got my portable table saw here, which has worked really well for me. And I made a little contraption of an outfeed table that just drops onto the table saw. I might go into some detail some other day about that. It's a nice little portable table, outfeed table. It's got legs that swing up, and it's got little hooks that hook onto the table saw, and it doesn't move around. It holds pretty true, and it's always nice to have an outfeed table. You see, I'm stacking all those components on that table that's there. That's also extremely portable, and I got that idea from, I believe his name is Carpenter 13. He's made a few videos, and from what I could tell, every video he's made is valuable to me. There's always great tricks and tips. There's another one of those tables. It's the Bora Speed Legs, something to that effect, and this is the tall version. And then there's a custom made uh, table surface that has a little lip around it, and it drops on top of the Boris Speed Legs, and it really works great. I I can put the legs and the tabletop in my trailer and take them everywhere I go. I usually keep one set in the trailer and another inside my garage. I do a lot of work in the garage. Right here, I'm in my backyard, and my neighbors don't seem to mind. But so I had split all the 2x6s in half, and now what I'm doing, I have a stop block set up, and I'm cutting all the legs to length on I believe it's a 8-degree miter, if I'm not mistaken. I think it's 8 degrees. So we're going to have all perfectly consistent legs and everything needs to be consistent. Everything needs to be repeatable. That stop that's on the miter saw wings, and that came from Mr. Spencer something or other, Insider Carpentry, who is amazing. He's completely amazing. He does beautiful work. He has great ideas, and he's certainly been an inspiration to me. Um, I I have a lot of experience working with wood, but I've really been working for myself in this field for a couple years. I've been doing other things in my life, and I got tired of those other things, and I thought I'd start working for myself, and I love doing this. So here's what I'm doing. And Mr. Spencer's been an amazing inspiration, um, a wealth of knowledge, and really helped me get on my feet. And these wings were one of his treats that I took on. Basically, for the most part, I copied it uh, completely. He has a few features that didn't really apply to me, so I didn't use all those features. But this goes with me everywhere I go. Also, it goes in my trailer, and people think it's cumbersome at times, and it can be, but it sure is a lot better than not having them. I'll tell you that every time. Every time I might complain about lugging these upstairs, it's always better than not having anything at all, or just using those flimsy arms that stick out. I think I threw those away the day I came home with that saw stand many years ago. Um, so still getting close to the end here, cutting these legs down to size, and then we're going to go into cutting some of the smaller components out of the same stock. These are the mid stretchers, if I'm not mistaken. Cross stretchers. I think that's what they're called, cross stretchers. There's a stretcher on the bar stool. There's two of them actually, and this is the cross stretcher that connects the two stretchers together. The stretcher is a full 2x4, which is inch and a half by 3.5, and this goes between those. Uh, and I decided to make this a smaller dimension just because it has a little offset in size, and I like the way it all flows together. So I'm cutting stretchers. Here's we're either cutting. I think we're cutting the seat supports at this point, which are 14 and a half inches. Got the stop block set up. I also have my PVC 90-degree angle at the end of the dust chute, and it shoots most of the dust into the trash can, and it works really well. It helps keep the yard a little bit better than it was before. Before I used to just blow it all into the neighbor's yard, and that wasn't a good thing for anybody. Um, I carry trash cans with me, and it's convenient just to try to contain the dust. And I eventually fill up trash bags with only sawdust, take it out to the street on big trash day, and they pick it up and no trouble. So I got my stretchers cut, cross stretchers. I think I'm cutting the seat supports prior to all the cross stretchers because the seat supports are also a full 2x4, which will need a little more attention later. But they're a little bit longer than the stretchers, so that's what you do. You cut your longer pieces first before you cut your shorter pieces. It's just the rule of thumb. Um, One thing I forgot to mention, cutting the legs to size with the bevel on the end. You got to pay attention to your good side and your bad side of the wood. You got to know what's going to be the face of the material, or what's going to be the inside, or the back of the material. Um, Barstool has four open sides to it, but if you have a bad section or a bad piece of material, you want to hide that as much as you can and not put it right out in the open. And that goes the same for the seat slats. It goes the same for the seat supports, for the stretchers and cross stretchers too. We're at a point where every little thing matters, um, as far as presentation. There's always one side that's better than the other, and uh, everything's showing. So you pay attention to that. Here I'm marking out these seat supports. They have a curved top to them. I'm getting everything flush on the bottom and the sides, and then mark the top. And as I do that, I also pay attention to the good side. There's going to be a if there's a bad edge, maybe that's the edge I'm cutting off, and that works out great. Or if there's a bad side, then I could put that side to the inside. No one's ever going to see it, and that works out great. Sometimes there's just some portion of the wood that it's going to be imperfect, and that's the way it is. And but you can sand some things down, and you can route over bad parts. Uh, Here, after I mark those uh, curves, and it's just a half-inch curve over 14 or 13 inches or so. Um, so it's a gentle little curve I cut out on the bandsaw, and I just do it one time. It's accurate enough. I don't need to clean it up on the belt sander, anything like that, or the stationary spindle sander. Um, but everything's pretty consistent because everything's marked with the same pattern, and it's just a matter of going through and cutting everything. Makes for a nice, consistent project. And this bandsaw's been good for me too. It's an old Craftsman. I found it on Facebook Marketplace for a fair price, and it, I went and picked it up one day. It's been real good. I've changed the what do you call them? The rubber doohickeys on the wheels, and got a bigger blade, a fresh, clean blade. It's a half-inch blade. It's not an amazing bandsaw, but it's been real good to me. It's my first bandsaw, so it's a lot better than not having one. I used to make a lot of these cuts with the jigsaw, and sometimes those after making so many cuts, the jigsaw gets hot, the blades get hot. Uh, it the bandsaw is clearly the better tool for the job here, and I've got it connected up to some dust control I've got in my garage. There's a little bit there on the table, but for the most part, it's all going away very well. I'm happy with the whole setup. And a little final tidy, and we can move on to the next step, which is those seat supports again. I've got a stop block set up there on the left side, and we need to cut 45s uh, at each end of these. And I wonder if maybe I should have cut my 45s before I cut the curve in the seat. I'll probably do that next time. I've made about 40 or 50 of these bar stools, and the first time I made like a batch of, I think the first time I made one or two, and then I made like a batch of five or six, and I've been doing batches of 10 since then. And each time I do it, I try to improve on something. I try to make a new jig, uh, try to get some repeatable practices. And I used to put some pencil marks on the chop saw, um, and those just kind of get lost with other pencil marks, and you need more than just a pencil mark. You need something. You need some notes and some consistency. Um, so I got my stop block set up. I'm doing the 45s on the other side. I had done the first side, flip them over, do the other side. Everything's slowly coming into shape. This is one thing when I turn the saw on a 45 or any kind of uh, degree more than 10 or 15 or so, the the dust that's blowing out completely misses the trash can. I could move the trash can, but I don't always think about that. Um, Besides, what I do collect normally, most of the cuts are straight cuts, and what I do collect really makes a difference. Catching these on the 45 would also make a difference, but it's also just dust in the grass, and it'll be all right. It's not too big a deal. So getting these buttoned up, and here's the components that I have, which is all the legs. There's 40 legs. There's 20 seat supports. There's 20 stretchers, and there were 10, what do we call them? Mid stretchers or something like that. So now we're into the seat slats. And the seat slats are 3/4 of an inch thick. Um, but I happen to have several stacks of this deck board, which measures about an inch to an inch and an eighth. It's really closer to an inch and an eighth. And I found this to be a great resource for the seat slats. It's got a lot of work that needs to go into it because they're not just 1x2s from the store, but they sell them as 5/4 material, but they really measure out to about an inch and an eighth. And so the first thing I do is cut them down on the chop saw to 16 inches each, and uh, and I need 13 per bar stool. So 10 bar stools, that's 130 seat slats that I need. And I grabbed enough to make at least that many. And again, if I have some extra, that's going to be fine because they will get used up on the next batch. So the first thing I do here, run these through the table saw because the deck boards have a little rounded edge on them, and I want to cut that rounded edge off. So uh, they're roughly 5.5 to 5 5/8 in width. I have the saw cut it or set it like a 5 3/8 or something like that, and it's just enough to take that rounded edge off. And this is where I really start paying attention to good sides and bad sides, and good edges and bad edges, and when to cut the good edge and uh, when to put the good edge uh, against the fence. Because from this point on, everything that gets cut is kind of there's a better side. So you want to make sure you're exposing the better side. After I got all the edges cut off of these deck boards, and there were several, now I'm cutting them down to an inch and a half wide, maybe an inch and 9/16, just to make a little bit large, just a hair larger than what they would have been. It's a big process. It's a long process. It's a lot of work on the table saw, close to the blade. It's close enough that I'm using the uh, push stick on every cut. I bring my left hand around just to remove the waste on every cut, keep it away from the blade. Um, and actually, when you're cutting hundreds and hundreds of boards like this, that's when accidents could happen because you get into a feeling of just you could close your eyes and continue the process, or you could just you might look back and say, what am I doing this safely? And you got to remind yourself to keep doing it safely, and but also, you know, keep doing it correctly for your finished product too. Um, so far with everything I've been doing, there's almost zero waste. I wanted to point that out. Cutting the 2x6s down was zero waste, and then splitting those in half, and then when I cut my bevel on the end or miter on the end, it was just a like a tablespoon of waste on the end. It was within the last 3/4 of an inch. Uh, that's been a good thing. I'm not ending up with 9-inch blocks and 6-inch blocks here and there. Everything's all the wood is being used up wisely. Until I get to this step, there is some waste in this, but like I said, I'm repurposing some other material, and and especially with these deck boards, there's always a bad side. There's a good face and a bad face usually. And when I get down to cutting these for the finished product, uh, the it's a good opportunity to get rid of the bad side. It ends up with a lot of uh, small pieces that are kind of like paint stirrers that you get at the paint store. Um, I've saved some because you might use those for something, but I've put some in little bundles out by the curb, and somebody will pick them up. People pick things up if you in our neighborhood if you put it out by the curb, but you show that you're getting rid of things. There's always going to be someone to come want it, find it, use it for something. Um, so I do some of that sometimes, and uh, and then most of the time I just throw them away though, uh, because it's easier that way. And city picks it up and dumps it, and it's gone. So we're getting closer to the end of getting all these seat slats at least cut to width, and after those are cut to width, I need to adjust the table saw again to 3/4 or maybe just a hair thicker than 3/4, and we're going to uh, cut the thickness of the seat slats, and that will be where we cut the bad part off. Before I cut each board, I'm looking at them to see which is the A side or the B side, and sometimes they're both pretty good, and you just pick one and go. But sometimes they're clearly one side is better than the other, and you gotta make a decision and go because and it's going to give you a good finished product in the end. Um, so we're cutting these down, and prior to the final rip, there's a little shot in here of the final stack. I think it was like 150 or so, roughly. But now I've got the table saw set up. It's again it's a finer rip, and it's closer to the blade, so you got to be extra careful. And there's still 150 of these to do again, and it takes a while. So you got to go through it, and you got to be safe, and you got to be aware of each step, and uh, just that's it. Safety is always first. Last thing you want to do is have some kind of injury with the saw blade. Nobody wants that. Once again, you see me stacking all my material on that portable table with the Bora centipede legs. That thing is very handy. and I can move it around. I can put one on the left side, one on the right side, because we're at a point where making all those cuts, you don't want to be walking around to make each cut. You don't want to be taking any steps to make each cut. You want maybe twist and grab it and cut and put it away, and twist and grab it and cut and put it away. Uh, the less walking you do, the better. And all the sawdust I'm making, you can't see it, but underneath that outfeed table, I've got another trash can laying on its side, just collecting the bulk of the dust. And there's still some dust that gets out of there, and there's just there you see a lot on the table. There's always going to be some dust flying around, and it was a little bit windy that day, but the trash can sure collects most of it and helps keep the yard uh, somewhat tidy. The yard's going to be dirty, and there's a lot of walking on it, and this isn't my primary yard. This is like a little section of the yard where I do some work in. The most of the yard is in better shape than this. So here, finally have all the seat slats cut down, and uh, so now, even though that was a lot of work, this is also a lot of work. I've got a 3/16 inch roundover bit in my router, and it's just a long process of routing and routing and routing, and keep moving, and just got to go through it all. If you're only making one bar stool, then you only got 13 of these to route, but we're making 10, and it's a process. But making 10, making several, sure helps for the efficiency of everything, instead of just cutting cutting a handful of legs and a handful of other pieces at a time, and a few more than that on the seat slats. Uh, Batching everything out, multiple components, going through the cutting process, and then later going through the routing process, and here and there there's a sanding process. It just helps to batch it out like that and do large amounts at a time. Just helps the efficiency of everything. Then we're going to be getting into drilling holes in the uh, stretchers, the seat stretchers. And I didn't show this on camera, but I've got a little jig to mark the holes in the dead center of all the seat stretchers. And I like, before I drill anything or mark anything, I find the up, the top, the bottom, the inside, the outside, and keep everything looking good for the final assembly. So here are all of the components for 10 bar stools. We got the legs, we got the seat slats, the seat supports, the stretchers, and the mid stretchers. It's time to begin assembly of the mid stretcher assembly. Two of these with one of these in the middle. And as with everything else, you find your good sides, your up and down, your inside and outside. And here's a little jig I've made up. I have been doing this without a jig, and just the other day when I was filming this, this is one of the jigs I have been meaning to get around to making, and it just helps me line everything up quickly, not have to get the tape measure out every time, and just drive. The holes are pre-drilled, so I just drive my 3-inch screws and hold everything flat and parallel to each other, and everything works really well. You see that cross stretcher has a little elevation on it. It's ultimate. All in all, it's 3/4 of an inch narrower than the stretcher. So I have a little 3/8 of an inch spacer underneath it, which centers it very well in between the two stretcher boards. It's always something to pay attention to. And the jigs certainly help. And keeping the clean faces out. If there happens to be a knot or a dent or a hickey of some kind, I could turn that to the inside, turn that to the bottom side, and try to hide the bad parts as much as I can. I keep my little, it was an old saucepan that was going to the trash, and I thought I'd hang on to it, and it comes in handy just to keep bulk screws in there. I buy my screws by 25 pounds at a time, different sizes, different grades. These are just a premium exterior grade screw, coated screw. I have a lot of stainless steel screws also, but the, around here the stainless steel it tarnishes and corrodes just as much as anything else does. So I save those for nicer work. And a lot in these bar stools, they'll get painted a lot, and once everything's painted and covered, it doesn't matter what kind of screw really, it'll be protected. But this stretcher assembly, it's the first step. Make this little H structure, and I stack them all up, and then I get to this other jig. I made this jig with the very first set of bar stools, and it's come in great. Uh, the everything in this situation at this point, the good side is facing down, and I had already gone through all the legs and figured out which ones are left and which ones are right and separated those. You don't want to just randomly throw them in, and then you'll end up at the end of your eighth or ninth or 10th bar stool with uh, you'll end up with several lefts and no rights or something like that, and that's going to be trouble. So I go through before I do any assembly and separate all the lefts and the rights, and if I have too many of one, I'll look through, and some of them have good edges on both sides, so I could use those either way. And I drop the seat support in there with the good face down. I drop the legs in there and clamp those into place. And I've got little spacer blocks in there to help support everything. And the angles, I clamp them to the side, clamp the legs to the sides. It keeps everything perfectly consistent, perfectly repeatable. Nothing has a chance to move anywhere. On this particular uh, at this step, I'm putting in 2.5 inch screws, so the screws won't accidentally come out the backside, which is the good side, the show side, and it's just another process. Go through the process, repeat the process, and you end up with a lot of decent components, which is going to make for happy bar stools. I think this is the final leg assembly. You see there's some bad edges on there, but those edges are going to be turned to the inside and up high. No one's going to see them. I've got this little jig. I lay it across the bottom, and I mark my holes for the holes that are going to go through the legs and into the stretchers. So everything's precise, everything's predetermined, um, and the jig sure helps speed everything up. You can see the finished seat supports. The good side is up. There are some like tan lines on some of this wood, but I've been seeing that a lot lately. I guess they come from the factory like that, or maybe through the drying process. Um, I've got this little bridge, I call it, to put the stretcher and the cross stretcher on, and I bring the legs up to it. I center the legs. I center the stretcher on the legs. There's just a little space on either side. all the legs are sitting on the same flat surface, so it keeps them all pretty flat, unless there's some wood movement later. Sometimes this wood's a little wet and it's still got some movement coming with it, but you know, they're not pianos, they're outdoor bar stools. They're going to be all right. And even if I have to later trim one of the legs off to make them take some wobble out, that'll be all right. That happens from time to time. So here, 3-inch screws. The whole seat itself, there's 2-inch screws going into the seat slats. There's 2.5-inch from one piece of 1.5-inch material to the other, and these they're they there's no chance of them blowing out anywhere. So I use good 3-inch screws, and they have a good bite to them, and they hold really well. Um, at this point, obviously, I didn't mention this earlier, but all the components have been sanded, if not routed, if not both. Uh, Bad edges, road rash, or truck damage, or parking lot trouble at the lumber yard. Get everything cleaned up as well as I can. And here's a little trick I came up with recently. I used to mark some and put a line. I used to do, gone through a few different methods of drilling holes, but now I've got this little jig that I've had for a while for other reasons, but it comes in handy. It's 1.25 inches. It's got a little lip on it. So if I line all the seat slats up together, um, and straighten them out, I can pass my jig along there and just drill a hole, and it goes pretty quickly. And you see there's different color variations in all the wood. I, uh, I try to make colors flow together from the browns into the greens and the yellows into what have you. Uh, you could see uh, I've got the full seat component, and now we're going to get it started there. And I've got my that same little gauge with the 1.25 inch overhang. It's also a 1/2 inch material, and it gives me a 1/2 inch overhang for the seat slats, which is exactly what I'm looking for. I use the clamps to adjust the width of everything, and then I put some on the end. I put one in dead center. I have a little gauge block to keep everything straight. I've since, I just made this video the other day, and I've already made another jig to help me do all the seat slats. Uh, I clamp it to one side, and it's got a built-in overhang, so I don't have to check each one. I just slap them all to the fixed position and send them home. But uh, we're getting towards the end of everything. The last two pieces on this side of seat slats and two on the other side, and we got a finished product. You see a finished product there on the right-hand side. Thanks for watching, everybody. I appreciate it. Let me know what I could do different. Let me know what you think about these. Let me know if we need to think about making plans available for anybody. I have been wondering about that. I just haven't gotten around to doing that yet. Thanks again. Leave some comments, uh, and thanks for watching. Bye bye.